Hello, everyone, and welcome to the very first episode of Language Insights. I'm Clara, and I am absolutely thrilled to be starting this journey with all of you today.
And I'm Leo. I can't tell you how excited I am to launch this series. Claire and I have been planning this podcast for months, and it's finally happening.
It really is a dream come true. For those just joining us, Language Insights is going to be a 6-episode series where we'll explore common English language errors and practical techniques to overcome them.
That's right. Whether you're a native English speaker or learning English as a second language, we'll be covering the pitfalls that trip up even the most fluent speakers. And I love that we're starting with grammar today because it's the foundation of everything.
Absolutely. Our episode today is called The Foundation: Common Grammatical Pitfalls. We'll be diving into those pesky grammar rules that give everyone headaches, myself included, if I'm being honest.
Oh, Claire, you're not alone there. Just last week, I was sending an important email to a client and spent a good 10 minutes debating whether to use who or whom in a sentence. I finally called my sister. She's an English teacher, and she sorted me out.
See, that's exactly why we need this podcast. Even as professional communicators, we still run into these challenges. And the best part is, we can all improve with a little knowledge and practice.
Couldn't agree more. So today we'll be covering subject-verb agreement, pronoun problems like who versus whom, tense consistency, misplaced modifiers, and even the great Oxford comma debate.
I'm particularly looking forward to that last one. I have some strong opinions about the Oxford comma.
I know you do. Let's save that energy for later in the show. For now, shall we jump into our first segment on subject-verb agreement?
Let's do it. So, subject-verb agreement, this seems simple on the surface, but it trips up so many people, including native speakers.
It really does. The basic rule is straightforward. Singular subjects take singular verbs, and plural subjects take plural verbs, like the dog barks versus the dogs bark.
Right, but it gets trickier with collective nouns. I was reading this article on Oxford International English's website, and it mentioned that one of the most common challenges for English learners is choosing the right word for the right context.
Oh, that makes so much sense. Take a word like team. Is it the team is winning or the team are winning?
Exactly. In American English, we typically treat collective nouns as singular, so the team is winning. But in British English, they often treat them as plural, if emphasizing the individuals in the group.
That's a great point. I had a British colleague who would say things like, the staff are in a meeting, and it always sounded strange to my American ears. But neither of us was wrong.
Languages are wonderfully complex like that. Another tricky area is when you have phrases between the subject and verb, like the box of chocolates is on the table. The subject is box, not chocolates, so we use is, not are.
That's a perfect example. Or how about sentences starting with there or here, like there are 5 books on the shelf versus there is 1 book on the shelf. People often make mistakes with those.
They sure do. And don't even get me started on indefinite pronouns like everyone, someone, nobody. They're always singular, but they feel plural sometimes.
That's so true. Everyone has their book sounds right to our ears now, even though, strictly speaking, it should be everyone has his or her book. Language evolves.
It absolutely does. And I think that's a good thing to remember while we're discussing rules today. Language is living and breathing, constantly changing based on how people use it.
I couldn't agree more. Though I still think it's valuable to understand the rules, even if you sometimes choose to break them. At least then you're making an informed choice.
Well said. Before we move on, any practical tips for our listeners on subject-verb agreement?
I'd say identify the true subject of your sentence before choosing your verb form. And when in doubt, try simplifying the sentence in your mind to see if it sounds right.
Those are excellent tips, Leo. Now let's dive into our next segment, pronoun problems, who versus whom and beyond. This is one area where I think a lot of us struggle.
Absolutely. I mentioned earlier how I got stuck on this very issue in an email last week. It can be really confusing.
Well, according to an article from Omniglot, there's actually a straightforward way to remember the difference. Who is a subjective pronoun? It's used when the pronoun acts as the subject of a sentence. Whom is an objective pronoun used when it's the object of a sentence.
That helps, but I think I need a more practical rule. I've heard that you can substitute he, she, their for who and him, her, them for whom to test, which is correct.
Yes, that's a fantastic memory trick. So if you can answer the question with he, she, or they, use who. If you'd answer with him, her, or them, use whom.
Let me try an example. Whom wrote this book? Well, you'd say she wrote this book, not her wrote this book. So the correct form would be who wrote this book.
Perfect. And for I don't know whom to ask, you'd say I don't know to ask him. So it should be I don't know whom to ask.
I love that trick. Though I have to admit, in casual conversation, I hear who used for everything these days. I wonder if whom is slowly fading from everyday language.
You're not wrong there. Language evolves, and whom is becoming less common in casual speech. But in formal writing or professional contexts, knowing the difference can still be important.
Absolutely. Now, pronouns aren't just about who, whom. Another common issue is pronoun reference, making sure it's clear what your pronouns are referring to.
Oh, yes, I see this all the time in student writing. Something like Lisa told Maria that she was going to the store. Who's going to the store, Lisa or Maria? It's ambiguous.
Exactly. And these unclear references can really confuse your readers. The solution is usually to rewrite the sentence to make it clear, like Lisa was going to the store and told Maria about her plans.
Another pronoun issue I see a lot is inconsistent person, switching between you, we, and one in the same paragraph. It can make writing feel disjointed.
That's such a good point. Consistency is key with pronouns. And speaking of consistency, should we move on to our next segment about tense consistency?
Yes, let's talk about tense consistency. I think this is something we've all struggled with at some point, especially when writing longer pieces.
Definitely. Tense consistency means keeping your verbs in the same time frame throughout a piece of writing, unless there's a logical reason to switch.
Exactly. I was looking at the article from 5 Minute English that mentioned English has 3 main tenses, past, present, and future, but each of those has 4 aspects: simple, continuous, perfect, and perfect continuous.
That's right, and it's those variations that often cause confusion. For example, someone might write, "Yesterday I went to the store and I'm buying some milk."
Ouch! That's a classic tense shift error. If you're talking about yesterday, both verbs should be in the past tense. I went to the store and bought some milk.
Absolutely, though there are legitimate reasons to shift tenses. If you're talking about something that was true in the past and is still true now, you might write, "When I was a child, I loved chocolate, and I still love it today."
That's a perfect example of an appropriate tense shift. The context makes it clear why the tense changes.
I find narrative writing particularly challenging for tense consistency. When I'm writing a story, I sometimes accidentally slip from past tense into present tense because the scene feels so immediate.
I've done the exact same thing. Actually, just last month, I was working on a short story for my writing group, and my draft was full of those accidental tense shifts. My writing partner caught them all in our critique session.
That's what good editors are for. But ideally, we'd catch these ourselves. One tip I found helpful is to read my writing aloud. Somehow my ear catches tense shifts that my eyes miss when reading silently.
That's a fantastic tip, Leo. Another approach is to choose your main tense before you start writing. Decide if your piece will be primarily in past or present tense, and then be vigilant about maintaining that choice.
And don't forget about the special case of reporting what someone said or thought. There are specific rules for how tenses shift in reported speech.
Oh, good point. If someone says, I am happy, and you're reporting
Hi
it in
there.
past tense,
Welcome
it
to my
becomes,
world.
she said she was happy. The present tense am shifts to past tense was.
Exactly. Tense shifts in reported speech follow logical patterns, but they can be tricky until you get used to them. Shall we move on to our next grammatical pitfall?
Let's talk about modifier misplacement, dangling and squinting modifiers. These can create some unintentionally hilarious sentences.
They absolutely can. I still remember a headline I saw that read, "Police discover crack in Australia." It was about a drug bust, not a geological feature.
That's brilliant. According to the Oxford International English article, misplacing your modifiers means putting these descriptive words or phrases too far away from the terms they're meant to be modifying in your sentence.
Right, and there are 2 main types. A dangling modifier doesn't clearly or logically connect to the element it's supposed to modify. Like walking down the street, the trees were beautiful.
In that example, it sounds like the trees were walking down the street. To fix it, you need to make sure the subject immediately follows the modifying phrase. Walking down the street, I thought the trees were beautiful.
Exactly. Then there are squinting modifiers, which could reasonably modify either what comes before or after them. For instance, employees who complain frequently are fired.
Oh, that's ambiguous. Does it mean employees who complain a lot get fired, or that firing employees who complain happens frequently?
Precisely. To fix a squinting modifier, you usually need to reposition it or rewrite the sentence. So either employees who frequently complain are fired, or frequently employees who complain are fired.
I see these issues all the time in my work. Last week, I was editing a company newsletter that said, after rotting in the cellar for weeks, my brother brought up some potatoes. Those must have been some very smelly potatoes.
Huh. That's a classic dangling modifier. And these aren't just stylistic issues, they can really confuse your reader. or completely change the meaning of what you're trying to say.
Absolutely. I think the key to avoiding misplaced modifiers is to keep related words together in a sentence and to read your writing carefully with fresh eyes.
Fresh eyes are crucial. Sometimes I'll write something that makes perfect sense to me because I know what I meant to say, but others might interpret it completely differently.
That's why I always try to step away from my writing before the final edit. Even an hour can give you enough distance to spot these kinds of errors.
Great advice. Now, shall we move on to our final segment, the Great Oxford Comma Debate?
Yes, the Oxford comma, possibly the most contentious punctuation mark in the English language. I've been looking forward to this segment all day.
I know you have. For our listeners who might not be familiar, the Oxford comma, also called the serial comma, is the comma used before the conjunction in a list of 3 or more items.
Exactly. So in the sentence, I bought apples, bananas, and oranges, that comma beforehand is the Oxford comma.
Some style guides make it optional, but others insist on it. The AP Style Guide, used by many journalists, says to omit it, while the Chicago Manual of Style says to include it.
And I am firmly in the pro-Oxford comma camp. I think it adds clarity and prevents ambiguity. There's this famous example, I'd like to thank my parents, Beyoncé, and God.
Without the Oxford comma, it sounds like your parents are Beyoncé and God. But with it, I'd like to thank my parents, Beyoncé and God. The meaning is clear.
Exactly. And there have been actual legal cases where the absence of an Oxford comma created genuine confusion. In 2017, a Maine dairy company had to pay $5 million to its drivers because of an ambiguously worded overtime clause that was missing an Oxford comma.
That's an expensive comma. Though to be fair, I think consistent style is more important than which style you choose. If your workplace or publisher has a style guide, follow it consistently.
That's true. Consistency is key in all aspects of writing. Though I will say, even when I worked at places that officially followed AT style, I sometimes snuck in Oxford commas when omitting them would cause confusion.
Rebel. But I agree, clarity should always be the priority. If including the Oxford comma makes your meaning clearer, use it regardless of what style guide you follow.
Absolutely. And remember, punctuation exists to help readers understand your writing. It's a tool for clarity, not just a set of arbitrary rules.
That's such an important point. All the grammar and punctuation rules we've discussed today have the same purpose: to help us communicate more effectively.
Exactly. And while debates like the Oxford comma might seem trivial, they actually reflect how much people care about clear communication.
Well said. And I think that's a perfect note to wrap up our discussion on common grammatical pitfalls.
What a fantastic first episode. We've covered so much ground today, from subject-verb agreement to pronoun problems, tense consistency, modifier misplacement, and the Oxford comma debate.
We really have. And I hope our listeners are walking away with some practical tips to improve their grammar. Remember, the goal isn't perfection, it's clear communication.
Absolutely. Grammar isn't about being pedantic, it's about being understood. And sometimes understanding the rules gives you the confidence to break them intentionally for effect.
That's such an important distinction. Grammar knowledge is empowering because it gives you choices as a communicator.
I couldn't agree more. And for our listeners who want to continue working on their grammar, I'd recommend reading widely and paying attention to how skilled writers use language. That's honestly how I've learned most of what I know about English.
Great advice. I'd also suggest checking out some of the resources we've mentioned today. We'll include links in our show notes to articles from Oxford International English, Omniglot, and other helpful sources.
And don't forget, practice makes progress. Try to apply one new grammar concept at a time rather than overwhelming yourself with rules.
That's such a healthy approach. Grammar should enhance your communication, not paralyze you with fear of making mistakes.
Exactly. Now, looking ahead to our next episode, we'll be diving into word choice wisdom, vocabulary traps, and triumphs. We'll explore commonly confused word pairs, redundancies, and how to develop a more precise vocabulary.
I can't wait for that one. We'll be covering tricky pairs like affect effect, there, and so many more that cause confusion for even the most careful writers.
Plus, we'll talk about how to eliminate wordiness and redundancy in your writing. It's going to be another information-packed episode.
Absolutely. Until then, we encourage all of you to be curious about language, notice patterns, ask questions, and remember that every great writer started as a learner.
Thank you so much for joining us for this first episode of Language Insights. If you enjoyed the show, please share it with friends or colleagues who might find it helpful. We'd love to reach as many language enthusiasts as possible.
And we'd love to hear from you. What grammar topics give you the most trouble? What would you like us to cover in future episodes?
Until next time, keep communicating with confidence. This is Clara.
And Leo, signing off. See you for episode 2.